Welcome to Talk is Cheap. If you missed last week's show, don't despair because we've got Bruce Watson back and we're going to talk more about the weather. Welcome back, Bruce.
Thanks, Mark.
Now, last week, at the end of the show, we were talking about the precipitation and how much there is, and you pointed out that there's a big difference from, say, south of the Twin Cities and Bloomington and north to Anoka, as much as 5-6 inches of rain a year, and you said that's a significant amount.
It certainly is.
Now, are you running around all these places measuring this by yourself, or
no, hardly,
do you have some help?
No, hardly. About when I worked for Honeywell, which was way back in 1967, I started a rain gauge network. And so subsequently, the Weather Bureau got interested in things like that, and they established a precipitation network, and then the state got interested in it. So there is a precipitation network now that is all across Minnesota. But on top of that, we did something else. In 1985, we started a local weather club. And our weather club started with 4 people. We had a person, myself in Roseville. We had a fellow named Dave Wierston in North St. Paul. We had a fellow named Steve Reckers out in New Hope. And we had another fellow named Jonathan Cohen down in Prior Lake. And we got together and we started this weather club. And we all had weather stations. And except for Jonathan, the other 3 weather stations date back, we have 30 years of record now, so we can compute normals. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, we got joined over the intervening years since 1985, that we'll be going 8 years now, by other people. So we now have 20 members that are taking weather observations around the Twin Cities. Now these stations, as a minimum, observe temperature and precipitation. And our stations that we have now are observing high and low temperature every day and rainfall. Now, in addition to that, many of the observers take other things too. Wind direction, wind speed, clouds. So some of the stations take sunshine and all sorts of specialty observations. Mm-hmm. So we now have a network of 20 people that are constantly monitoring the weather every day across the Twin Cities. And of course, we do things like compute our climatological normals and see just how the different stations vary, how the various weather elements vary. Now, Mark, some of the weather elements vary a great deal. Precipitation, for instance, varies a great deal across the Twin Cities. We have this wet band that runs from Lake Minnetonka through the New Hope area and then across the northern suburbs like Roseville, New Brighton, White Bear Lake, Stillwater, and then on to Wisconsin. Now this is part of a larger belt. There is generally a large stormy belt that starts down in Texas and goes through Oklahoma, then up through Kansas, through Nebraska, Iowa, and then into Minnesota around the Blue Earth, Watonwan County area, and then comes up along the Minnesota River west of St. Peter and on up in the Henderson area. And then, of course, it picks up through Lake Minnetonka, like we said before. And then when it heads east from Stillwater, it goes out toward and pretty much terminates in Phillips, Wisconsin. Now, this is an area where you do seem to get enhanced rainfall. You get rainfall more often, and you also get more storminess. Mm-hmm. So this would be more or less your wet belt, your storm belt. And, of course, since it runs through the Twin Cities, it's especially interesting to us and to our weather club. So incidentally, Mark, we're always looking for members, so if anybody's interested, we'll try to help you set a station up too.
Okay, so it sounds like there are some very specific patterns that obviously your group and yourself have recorded over a length of time that maybe you can make some predictions that for the next 10 years, 20 years, this belt will probably remain wetter than other parts.
Right, Mark. This belt is very persistent, and the reason it's persistent, it's tied in with topography. It all depends on the shape of the North American continent. The fact, one thing, of course, we're right near the middle of the continent. We're 1,000 miles from the ocean, off to the south, 1,000 miles to the west, and Minnesota's closest approach, of course, to the ocean is actually Hudson Bay. That's our closest saltwater, which is less than 1,000 miles. But being so close to the middle of the continent, we are influenced by this continental effect. We have a climate that's called highly continental. We have a large contrast between winter and summer. Our summers are quite hot. and our winters are quite cold. I guess I don't have to tell people
Yeah.
that, we know that. But this is called continentality. Now, there's another thing that influences us, and that is the Rocky Mountains off to the west and the Great Plains. As you go from here westward, the plains, of course, slope upward until you get to the front ranges of the Rockies, and then it rises very abruptly. But that particular configuration helps to generate this storm belt. And another thing that then has another influence is there's a high moraine in the western part of Minnesota around Alexandria. And it picks up just a little bit north of Wilmer, and then it goes on up, and we have high ground that runs around the Leech Lake area and then off to the northeast. And on either side of that, you generally have drier weather than you have over the high ground itself. So the high ground also picks up about 5, 6, 7 inches more rain than the Red River Valley to the west or the Mississippi Valley to the east. So we have all these topographic effects, and these are the things that anchor in the dry and wet zones. So our dry and wet zone here is a combination of the influence of where we are in the continent, the Rockies and high plains to the west, plus some of your local topography here in Minnesota.
So I guess what I hear you saying is we're going to continue to have cold weather in the winter and warm weather in the summer. We're not going to see that really change.
Yeah, unless we undergo a major climatic shift. Now, bear one thing in mind, that if we would have a difference in the way the winds blow that was very marked, let's suppose instead of having a prevailing northwest wind here in the wintertime, we would have a prevailing southeast wind. If that were to happen, and it could happen, the atmosphere can rearrange itself. If that were to happen in the wintertime, we could actually average 15, 20 degrees warmer in January than we have been averaging. So you can change your climate, and climate does change. One thing that I read in the paper a few weeks ago, well, it was last summer, I guess, is that somebody had done some research and they found that climate changed abruptly. Well, this has been known for a long time. When you get climatic changes, they do tend to be very abrupt. So we should not be surprised if we do get abrupt changes. One thing that is also true of our climate lately is that it's been very warm. We've had very warm years. As cold as this summer was, this year is just right about now as we're going into the middle part of the fall. And the late part of the fall was actually averaged pretty close to normal.
Okay.
It hasn't been a cold year all in all.
I guess people have short memories because everybody's talking about it being so cold. We're going to take a short break and then we'll be back.
Rock anthem is something that really inspires. Real honest.
Just driving along in your Chevy, it's something you'd like pump your fist to. Just rock.
Turn it up.
Introducing Entertainment Weekly's new Rock Anthem CD collection. This exclusive new collection has 24 timeless rock anthems, compiled for the first time on 2 amazing CDs or audio cassettes. And when you order Entertainment Weekly, you get the Rock Anthems collection free.
For free?
I don't believe it.
It's free when you subscribe to Entertainment Weekly at a savings of almost 70% off the cover price. Call right now and get 30 issues for 4 monthly installments of only $5.99 each, or use your credit card today.
This is definitely the ultimate air guitar collection.
So call and subscribe today. You'll save almost 70% off Entertainment Weekly, and you'll get the new Rock Anthems collection free.
2 CDs of those old songs would be like bringing back the old friends.
We're back at Talk is Cheap with Bruce Watson talking about the weather. Now, last year when you were here, Bruce, I remember you saying that it's winter's starting earlier and spring is starting earlier, and that you have seen this coming. Has there been any change since we talked last year? Is that pattern going to continue?
Well, Mark, it's remarkable in that it does continue, and if anything, it's getting stronger. If you pick up a copy of the weather guide, my weather almanac that I wrote back in 1974 and 75, one of the things I put in their feature of our climate is that our springs seem to be advancing in our period from late January, February, March, April. That period is getting warmer. And at the time I wrote that, I thought, well, this is probably going to reverse itself because, it just can't keep getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Otherwise, we're going to have some spooky thing like happen that February will be warmer than December, and that's unheard of. If you go back through all the weather records, never has February been warmer than December for any length of time at all, certainly not for a 30-year normalizing period. So I thought that can't happen. We could never have a situation where February would average over a 30-year period warmer than December. You know, those things just don't happen. Well, Mark, it happened. My normal temperature for February right now is warmer than my normal December temperature. And I never thought I would live to see something like that happen. That is a very, very strong climatic shift. And of course, this is due to the fact that, again, our late winter and early springs are getting much warmer, much warmer. And last year was no exception. It happened again. But this thing just keeps going on, that we're getting these warm springs and late winters. I actually call it the Bach beer warm-up, because Leinenkugel beer, which seems to be the biggest selling Bach around here, they come out about January 20th. And their beer generally is in the stores until sometime in April. And that's just the time that we have this real warm spell.
Are we having still the number of cold days that they've just shifted, or are we seeing actually shorter winters?
Okay, the warmth has been more spectacular than the cold, but our October, November, December era has gotten colder. This has also been progressive. However, the warm-up in the late winter and early spring has been stronger than the cool-off that you've been getting in October, November, December.
So no more waiting until the 1st of June to plant.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Mark.
Do you see this pattern continuing?
Well, I certainly do, Mark.
And what do you? Why is it happening?
Why is it happening? I wish I knew. I wish I knew. Now, there's different reasons that it could be happening. One is that it's just part of the natural order of things. We know that if we go through history, we see these large climatic fluctuations.
And this would be one.
And these, well, this could be one. Okay. This could be natural. I'm not saying it isn't natural, and it might not be, but it could be, because we have seen things fluctuate naturally. This is one of the greater shifts, I must say. This is not a small climatic shift. It's a rather major shift. But another thing that could be causing it could be greenhouse warming. It may be that this is an effect of the amount of carbon dioxide, methane, and those gases increasing in the atmosphere. It could be due to that. Again, I'm not saying it's due to that. I don't know why it's happening, but it certainly is happening, and it is most remarkable, most remarkable.
Now, a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about the change in the ozone, and everybody was supposed to be concerned and putting on sunscreen. And then lately, there seems to be kind of a shift back to, well, maybe it's not as big a change as we thought. What's your feeling on that? Is there a big change, or is it natural, or?
Well, the drop in the ozone was quite remarkable. I must say there is I think it's a 22-year cycle to ozone. Remember, we have lots of cycles in meteorology, but there is a 22-year cycle to the amount of ozone in the atmosphere. And especially when you're talking about the stratosphere. So we were in that part of the cycle where the ozone was supposed to decrease. But excuse me, it was decreasing, Mark, more than it should have.
Okay.
And it has been very low. Now, it will probably come back to some extent because now we're going into a period where the ozone should be starting to increase. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. But in general, there has been a decrease in ozone in the atmosphere, not only in the Arctic and Antarctic, but also through the whole atmosphere. There has been a decrease. And this decrease is attributed to man's interference with some of our chemical processes, our industrial processes.
So human beings can have a major impact on the weather.
Oh, we certainly do. There's no question that the amount of carbon dioxide in the air has increased remarkably. If you go back to the 1890s, the average carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere was 290 parts per million. It's now about 350 parts per million. So you can see that's from 290 to 350. That's a big increase. So man, yes, does have an influence on the weather, very definitely.
It sounds like something that maybe the governments of the world should be listening to.
Well, they have been. You had this conference, of course, in Quebec last year, where the countries of the world did agree to limit the fluorocarbons from their industrial products.
I remember when I was growing up hearing about seeding clouds, and a few weeks ago I read that at one point there were some experiments to try and change the direction of hurricanes. I don't remember exactly how they did it. Something like super cold water.
Yeah, what they did was drop silver iodide into the clouds, especially the clouds at the core of the hurricane. They call them hot towers, because this is where you get a tremendous amount of heat produced, and this is associated with the very heavy rains, the very strong upward motion near the center of a hurricane. Not at the center, which is the eye, but some distance from the center.
And I remember the article correctly. Basically, they said they really didn't have much success in this.
Yeah, Mark, there wasn't much success, and I did participate to some extent in that project. One of the reasons that it was unsuccessful, probably more than anything, was that we could not see the clouds except if the hurricane was in very special locations. We would have loved to see the clouds, of course, when it was getting near land, to see if some of the theories could be tried, but you could not. That was illegal, because what could happen is there could be a terrible lawsuit brought that the hurricane steered, let's suppose in the hurricane we're headed, say, for Myrtle Beach, and we see the cloud very heavily instead of hit Jacksonville and Fort Lauderdale. Well, I can imagine Fort Lauderdale, we would have said, we have proved the theory that we can change the direction of hurricanes. Can you imagine the lawsuit you would have gotten from people that live in Jacksonville and Fort Lauderdale? The people in Myrtle Beach, well, they would have said thanks. I doubt if they would have paid for the trial. But there were some horrendous legal problems that were tying in with that. So the project could really had its hands tied constantly.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Again. Hello, hello again.
I picked them going into the North Star Classic on sheer potential.
White Bear certainly has a chance in this game, but I don't even think they needed our negative help to get that.
Don't miss the return of the Puckheads, Mondays on Prep Sports Weekly.
You certainly have been busy lately.
I know, and it's wonderful. There's so much to do. Museums, hiking, senior Olympics, learning to paint, doing aerobics. Imagine.
I've been meaning to get out more.
Don't put it off. At any age, there are dozens of things you can do to stay healthy and active and have a great time.
I really think these activities keep me young.
Maybe you're overdoing it just a little.
You think so?
Contact your Recreation and Park Department.
We're back at Talk is Cheap. Bruce, what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years in predicting weather? Are there any exciting changes coming along?
Well, Mark,
you see?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things you can probably anticipate with a fairly high degree of confidence. One is that we're going to see wet weather. I really foresee that the rest of the 1990s and at least the first 5-6 years of the 2000s being a very wet time. So this is something people might want to consider.
A wet time for the Midwest or a wet time for the
I'm talking
United
about
States?
our general part of the country.
Okay.
The Twin City area, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, northern Illinois, this general, southern Manitoba, this general part of the world. That we're going to be generally quite wet in this period of time. I think that at this point we would have to consider that probably we're going to have this continued warm weather, this Bach-Beer warm spell, indefinitely. Until it breaks, I guess I would ride with it. It's something that we should sort of plan for, and we sort of should plan on our falls continuing to be cool. In other words, don't look for October, November to December to be very warm times. As far in general, if you take the time as a whole, the year as a whole, I would say that we could probably expect warm years for the next 2 decades. That in general, we're going to run warm. We've run warm now since 1979. We had a very cool spell from 1963 to 1979, and that lasted for something like 17 years. Well, we're actually about 12, 14 years into the current warm spell, but I really can't see the warm spell ending this quickly. I think we're going to, in general, stay warm for at least the next 10 years.
Are you predicting a good period for agriculture during this time, or is it going to be wet and maybe not quite warm enough?
Well, all in all, it should be fairly good. I mean, warm and wet can only augur good for the farmer, unless it gets overdone, which this last year did. But it was only because this year was so exceptional and so exceptionally wet that we had trouble. I don't think we should look for any more really exceptionally wet years for at least the next several years. That even though our years may run on the wet side, say for the next 10, 15 years, they're not going to be that super wet. I mean,
not the flooding of this year.
Right, this was just super wet, and we just shouldn't expect that. But we should expect that in general we're going to have warm weather, and that we are going to have wet weather again. That we're going to be warm in February and March, and we're going to be cool in October, November, December. Down the line, we're going to have to return to some of those really cold winters, and that's going to probably come up I'm sure within the lifetimes of people that are listening right now, a greenhouse effect or not, or greenhouse, I'm not sorry, greenhouse effect is a scientific truth. Greenhouse warming is a theory. You've got to watch out to differentiate that. So often people mix up a theory and a scientific certainty. But the greenhouse effect, we do know that the greenhouse gases do cause the atmosphere to become to be warmer. Greenhouse warming involves whether or not the increase in these gases is causing the temperature to become warmer. But even though the greenhouse warming may be occurring, we are still going to see those winters where the temperature gets down to 30 below in the Twin Cities, maybe even to 40 below, or that we chronically run below zero, let's say for a month in a row. Or, the minimum temperature goes below zero, or that we run, say, spells of 40 days and such, where even the high temperature never goes above 32 degrees.
But that's 20 years away.
Probably so. Yeah, those really bad ones are probably the distance, but they're going to come. And this, even though our climate does get significantly warmer because of other things, you still are going to have these cold winters, and you're also going to have perhaps cold decades. Now, one thing I want to say is, for sure, that any of these winters, for 1 year, you could have a very cold winter. There's nothing saying that we just can't have a temporary change in the circulation pattern and suddenly we get a very cold winter. There's nothing to say that this winter couldn't be our coldest winter on record, but I don't think so.
Okay.
And I don't think that we're going to see, if we do see a very cold winter this year, we probably won't see it next year.
Okay. Now, which generation really walked to school in 10 feet of snow? I mean, my parents were always telling me that, but I remember being very snowy when I was a kid. So who lived through this snowier period?
Okay, the snowiest period, the people that lived through the biggest snows are the people that went to school in the 1980s.
Oh, so it wasn't my generation either.
No, but the 80s were extremely snowy, but so were the 70s and the last half of the 1960s. This from 65 up until a couple of years ago, this was a very, very snowy period. In fact, it was the snowiest period in the history of the Twin Cities, even allowing for differences in the way snow was measured, and there has been a slight change, which tends to inflate snowfall now. It used to be that one would observe snowfall at the end of the storm, or once a day, but now snowfall is measured every 6 hours. Officially, this is the way we're supposed to do, is measure the snow accumulation every 6 hours, or what the maximum was in that 6 hour period. So we have had a change, but even allowing for that, it's still the snowiest period. Now, another very snowy period was back in the 1880s. So if great-great-grandma said that it was snowy, right, she was telling the truth too.
Okay. Before we go, I have to ask you this. People are always blaming the weatherman and saying they're never right. They're always wrong. How accurate are these forecasts we're getting in the paper for the next 4 or 5 days or on the news?
Okay, Mark, interesting thing. There hasn't been that much increase in the accuracy of the 24 and 48-hour forecast, but there's been a tremendous increase in the accuracy of the forecast 3, 4, 5 days ahead of time. A tremendous increase. So it's gotten to the point now where the accuracy of the forecast 4 days out is as accurate as the forecast was 48 hours out about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's one person that should always be given credit for in every weather forecast. Anytime a weather man on TV signs off, he should say, we also want to give credit to L.F. Richardson, who helped prepare this forecast. L.F. Richardson is the man that wrote the first equations for the computer program. He did this way back in the 1920 era. And his equations gathered dust until the computer came along that made the use of his equations possible. But L.F. Richardson, an Englishman, he was a Quaker, a conscientious objector, who had a lot of time to think because of the stagnation in World War I. He was an ambulance driver, and he got the idea you should be able to take equations and therefore forecast the weather with it. When he did it, he went back to London after the war, and he got a group together, but it took 2 weeks to make the forecast. So his paper was only of theoretical interest until the computer came along. But the thing is that Richardson's work became the basis of your forecast every night on TV. So one of the persons that helps prepare every forecast nowadays is L.F. Richardson.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. It's been very interesting. We'll be back next week with Talk is Cheap, and I'm not even sure who our guest will be at this point.